Hello, wonderful listeners, and welcome to Pavement Matters. Today we've got a little bit of a treat for you. We have Dr. Chris Raymond, all the way from Canada. Chris holds a PhD in civil engineering from the University of Waterloo in Canada. He also has 35 years of experience with the Ministry of Transportation in Ontario. He also has key roles of the head of asphalt materials, head of maintenance, and the head of construction and engineering contracts all throughout his career. And also in Australia, he spent 9 months with the Queensland Department of Transport and Main Roads as a principal advisor. Welcome, Chris. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. All right, well, today we're actually going to be discussing infrastructure maintenance and how that's implemented and how best to optimize it. One of the things you have to know about infrastructure asset management is that there are three broad frameworks. So you've got the asset owner, they own the asset, they commission a asset manager, I suppose, to come in and do all the asset planning, so the engineering components of it. And then you also usually have a maintenance contractor who does all the hard yards, fills the potholes, plows the roads, does all of the things that turns it into an actual thing. How have you seen this process evolve over the years?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are different frameworks, and it's important to recognize that one framework doesn't fit necessarily all situations, right? And there has to be an evolution. And obviously, a lot of times things started where all of the operation was internal to an owner, and slowly things have been evolving where they've outsourced certain components of the whole sort of pavement maintenance and roadway management, right? So then they've done that, and then in some situations it's been 100% outsourced through a concession or sometimes type of ownership that way, and they all have some strengths in it and advantages.
Well, if you look at, say, civil engineering in general, if you have a problem that needs to be solved, something that needs to be overcome, it can sometimes be, difficult to work out exactly what needs to be done. But when it comes to maintenance and infrastructure management, especially if you've got a lump sum contract or a variable rate contract, like sometimes you need to know the condition of the network as you're going in, and sometimes it's just not possible to know that. Do you have any perhaps strategies, I suppose, that you might have in order to ensure that you end up in the best possible position in such a situation?
Yeah, and I mean the one sort of idea or recommendation that's really just sort of jumping out at me, and it's really important, is that your contracting model, as I mentioned before, it really needs to fit the situation, and to just jump into sort of a complicated model that has a lot of risk transfer back onto the contractor. If the owner and the contractor haven't really evolved to that level, it's going to be a challenge for both parties. Again, if the owner doesn't have the confidence to sort of have the contractor making those decisions, and if the contractor maybe doesn't have the experience to understand all that needs to go into making those decisions, well, what can happen is that even if it's a best bid, it's going to be likely a lower priced procurement that's going to be successable in terms of selecting the contractor, and then they're going to push through a lower cost product to maybe what the agency's looking for, and they'll get themselves into trouble, and then that's not what the owner is looking for either. So there'll be frustration on both sides, and it can really set things back because it now brings both sides farther apart rather than bringing them together. And I think owners may get excited when they see a very good value bid or, you know, a very low priced bid, but, you know, that isn't all good news for an owner, because you know, it may look good, and you know, when you open the bids, but you know, if it's not going to deliver what you're looking for, it's likely to create some challenges, and you know, possibly also relate to relationship changes or challenges going forward that again can, if you're trying to do a change management of changing your contract models, you know, that will really can be a setback.
So you've talked a lot about the actual the relationships and the relationships between all of these different parties within this big process. And one of the things I've always wondered is, how often do we see the individual personalities of each, you know, actor in this big system? How often do we see their personalities influence the direction of a particular contract?
Yeah, I think the personalities of the individuals and the institutions that they represent, and because it's, you know, it's the individual as well as the institution on both sides, can really influence things, as well too. You know, the desires may not align, the individual's desire may not, or perspective may not align with it in institutions, and it again can pose a lot of challenges, and again set you back from the success you're looking for in that change, because it does kind of relate back to change management, or even just in a contract in general. It doesn't even have to be a contract that's bringing in change.
And I suppose it's in many cases, I would imagine there's like an us versus them mentality that can sometimes develop in these kinds of relationships.
That's right, and you know, that happens a lot, and sometimes it happens with reasoning behind it, but it does set things back, and especially as contracts become more complicated and stuff, that importance for collaboration and working together with both parties is really really important, and you know, how helping each other when you can provide solutions that can be of mutual benefit to both people. I mean, that's where you get your big success, when the two parties work together within that contract to possibly even give more than what was originally intended.
Okay, so a lot of the time we find that even in a smaller organization, say local government, where the maintenance and the engineering are actually part of the same group, even in those cases we find that communication can break down. They don't have access to the same information. How important do you think sharing information between, say, asset owner and maintenance contractor, and how often do you find that this might cause an issue?
Well, if it's working well, it's good, and if it's not working well, then it can pose problems. And you know, the maintenance people, you know, they're important to feed information to the designers so that they're aware of the issues that are the challenges that they're having in maintenance, so that, you know, in the next rehabilitation or that those concerns are addressed, right? Because if you ignore them, then you're just going to likely repeat some of those challenges that they've had to deal with. If, you know, they need to identify that the poor performing areas and the sort of maintenance that's being done on those areas, such that in the rehabilitation it's addressed, and vice versa. You know, the rehabilitation people have to kind of tell the maintenance people what's being done, so that they can comment and give feedback to them. And it's, you know, again, it's just emphasizing the need for communication between everybody.
Okay, cool. So, like most areas, especially today, nothing stays the same. Everything's dynamic, and road and infrastructure management is exactly the same. Where do you see the industry going?
Yeah, in terms of pavement managing, I see quite an explosion in terms of the amount of technology and data that's going into pavement management systems, or at least the opportunity for that data to go into the systems. And then the next challenge is, how do you make good use of all that information without overwhelming the engineer? And that's obviously one of the things that is important. If you've got a contractor doing some of the pavement management side of things, which is more common in Australia here, but it does happen in North America in some of the concessions and private-public partnerships. And there, it's important that they incorporate good pavement management to bring it in and ensure the asset is properly managed, because they can be driven by other factors, particularly if it's an entity that's kind of new to that side of things.
Yeah, because some of the data that is collected these days, I mean, the demands for the data are there. The means of collecting the data is definitely there. But I am not always convinced that enough thought or research has been done in actually using that data. How can you best use it? Because it is a lot of data. We're talking like, hundreds of millions of data points over a whole network. And there's also these days a lot more sources of data. Like we're talking about developing, getting information from vehicle manufacturers that collect telemetry from vehicles as they drive around. Cars these days have cameras built into them. Do you think that kind of data has a place? Do you think it could be useful for pavement and infrastructure maintenance and management?
Yeah, I think yeah, it's a huge opportunity. One of the challenges is that it's there's so much data there already, and it's overwhelming to the engineers and people already in terms of what to utilize and then how to use it. And but it's there's a massive amount of really great information there, and I think as other technology advances with automation and artificial intelligence grow, and we understand it better and are able to sort of harness some of those technologies, and that'll really help taking all that data and giving us sort of direction that we can understand on how to proceed. So that, I think that's one of the great opportunities that's going to be there for us.
I suppose if we're looking even further in the future, I mean this is something that's been discussed for like 15 years now, but perhaps even longer. I mean, it was certainly discussed when I was in university, but the Internet of Things. I suppose one day we can even think about having things like sensors in the road itself that can detect trucks. You might not need to do traffic counts anymore. The road itself might be inbuilt with all of what you need to do that just in the road natively.
And that's a great example, and there are ways, and it doesn't even need to be putting a new sensor in the road or developing that sensor to put it in a road. It may just be a way of understanding what's already out there, and then maybe you can capture information from a cell phone tower that's on the side of the road and tracking the vehicles going down the road and stuff like that. And there's all kinds of ways of doing that I don't understand, but they're out there somewhere, right? And again, and there'll be new ways of developing that, and again, the connected vehicles can give you a lot of that information. And you know, from as two pavements people here sitting together, it's the truck loadings that are often a greater concern to us. And again, there's information within the trucking carriers that again you can utilize to get certain truck information. And again, you know, you could put in some weigh scales or track information from the truck enforcement people on the side. And you know, again, there's ways to try and take that information and again have some sort of way of bringing that and giving us the information we can better understand and utilize as the pavement engineer.
Okay. And one of the things you touched upon there was actually with all this data that's coming in, how does one QC it? Because I mean, like I'm marketing, a marketing student originally, and one of the things I was told is garbage in, garbage out. And if there's no way to tell what's garbage and what's really good, how do you know? How can you make proper decision making with that?
And you're right. It is important that we understand the information going in, the information going out, and I think that's for us to harness that. We have to see what information is there, how it can be used effectively, and you know the controls that are on it to have some quality check on the information going into the system, but also the quality check on the models that are using it to really give us the direction or recommendations on how to take that information and how we use it.
Of course. Another problem that's plaguing not just, I suppose, everyone in Australia, but also the world is climate change. There's a big, you know, I mean, if you look at Australia alone, just the East Coast, in September was the driest September ever, almost zero rainfall along the East Coast. And we also have incredibly hot days in the beginning of October. This is going to have some pretty severe impacts on our road network. And a lot of the things that we do in maintenance planning is based on averages, average rainfalls, average loading of trucks, and I feel like we can't rely on those averages as much in an environment that has such a flexible climate.
You know, I mean, the future is difficult to predict. I think that the climate change is one of the things that we need to be factoring into our engineering. In terms of climate change for the pavement, well, in terms of climate change for roads, you know, we're already seeing it in terms of the 50-year storms, the 100-year storms, and the drainage plans you've got in place for selecting the culverts and stuff, and how those 50-year storms that were calculated 20 years ago are different than the 50-year storms that we're having maybe every 10 to 20 years now. So that's a challenge directly that is really impacting the infrastructure today. In terms of a 1 degree rise in pavement or average temperatures or pavement temperatures over the last 20 years and maybe another one over the next 20 years, you know, I don't know that right today is going to overstress our pavement our pavement durability, but you know, we have to understand there's also a lot of other factors coming into play with the amount of how traffic has increased over the last 50 years. Our roads are pretty saturated for traffic now, but again, who knows how that's going to be. You know, a traditional car weighs less than an electric car, so now I don't know that additional loading is in itself going to, again, impact the durability of of the pavements, but trucking loads have really increased, and the tire pressures to the trucking industry over the last several years, and again, that has impacted the stresses on our pavements, and that's something we need to be aware of. And again, what we see in the next 20 years on that side will change things. And then connected vehicles, and again, there's a lot of information there. Everyone's got rutting models, but if we start driving automated vehicles that now drive right in the middle of the lane, well, a lot of those rutting models, they had wander in sort of the line that the vehicle went down. And so how does that change that? And again, there's a need to be forever sort of adapting and doing quality checks on your models that were developed and really well suited for the situation versus, everything seems the same, but if you've got an automated vehicle that's now driving right in the center of the lane, then that's going to impact your running models quite a bit.
It makes me think a little bit about how in the turn of the century, last century, everyone was believing, well, there's so many more horses and carriages on our roads and streets these days, and as the population increases, so too will the demand for that. And some people were theorizing that by, say, 1950, there would be so much manure on the roads that you wouldn't be able to walk down the road. But that obviously never came to happen because times changed. And I suppose it's the same with these rutting models, where it's not, sometimes it's simply not possible with what we have in the current to really know what's going to happen in the future. Any number of things could change. Maybe the solution is developing new rutting models. Maybe the solution is developing flying cars. It's really hard to know sometimes.
It is, and again, you could have someone that develops, in rutting models and all those, their modeling is really challenging for pavements, right? Because there's so many factors going into it. But even if you were to get it right today, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, that model may not be applicable, whether there's some climate change that's affecting temperature, that is affecting pavement moisture, or as I mentioned, you've reduced the pavement wander the vehicle wander within a lane to cause more rutting, all in sort of the same wheel path or a smaller wheel path. So again, that falls back into the opportunities that are there with more data within your pavement management systems, and then feeding that back to that continuous improvement of your pavement models and rutting models.
Cool. Now, one thing that's always been a problem, and I don't see it getting any better, is that of the maintenance backlog. A lot of asset owners in Australia and around the world just have this massive backlog. There are more people using the roads. The weather is more unpredictable. Sometimes we have floods and storms, and sometimes it's incredibly dry. What strategies can you think of that might help us tackle this increasing backlog?
Yeah, and you know what? That's a massive challenge, and it's always a shame when you see well-built roads and then inadequate maintenance of those roads, I think pavement management systems, asset management systems can be a tool that can be a tool to be used for the engineers to educate. I call them the accountants, but it's not always accountants, but the funding people on the need for maintenance and how maintenance is essential and a great investment to preserve your asset. And that's always challenged by some political desires to be expanding. Everyone likes to see a new road or a widened road, and everyone instantly sees the benefits of that in terms of the added capacity to the network. But it's and no one sees the benefit of going out there and doing properly timed rehabilitation, other than the fact that your whole asset is then maintained in a much better life cycle, right, or life cycle cost.
I mean, that's something we struggle with all the time here, and that is pavement maintenance isn't sexy.
No,
but pavement building, oh yeah.
And I had the example when I was in maintenance, and it was with the yearly, the annual line painting on roads, and that's a pure maintenance fund, and you can argue to get $10 million to do your line painting, and you get it, and it's $10 million spent, and other than your lines are preserved for another year, and safety is preserved, at the end of the year you have nothing to show for that $10 million. If they'd gone and spent that money and rehabbed a pavement or built a new pavement, at the end of that year you would have had the large majority of that investment preserved as additional asset to the network.
Okay, well, I think we're almost out of time, but one of the last questions I want to ask you is that if you could go back in time, or if you have a protege or anyone like that wants to start in engineering or infrastructure management, pavement management, anything, what path would you recommend them to take?
My advice would be to follow what you like, and I'm assuming you've probably gone through some sort of engineering degree. As a young engineer coming out, the job that you'll be doing in your first 5 to 10 years will likely be very technically based, using a lot of the sort of core skills you developed in your studies. However, after that, there'll be a lot of opportunities for you to develop into more leadership roles, where you can bring out your leadership and marketing and communication and interpersonal skills. If you want to progress into those management skills, or even as an engineer leading projects and having to get that collaboration for partners and developing that long-term trust with the partners that you're working with, either internally or externally. And again, so and then your first couple pavement designs and stuff like that, you're really focused on running through the calculations, but after doing that for 5-10 years, you'll understand the calculations, and you'll be able to look sort of deeper into the data to try and figure out what's going on, and maybe have some engineering judgment to make modifications to what you're designing.
Well, Chris, I'd love to thank you for coming all this way to see us, and really, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for our listeners as well for joining us for this wonderful ride. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments of LinkedIn or of this podcast. You can view this podcast at Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and we hope to see you next time on Pavement Matters.